Good morning and welcome to the Morning Spotlight Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hand, coming to you as always from the Spotlight Studios in Morristown, New Jersey. Of course, this is part of the bigger PodMax event here on January 15th, Friday, January 15th. This is the third episode in a day that we've been recording episodes all day, listening to some great keynote speakers. Our guest for this episode is a self-described nomad. Born and raised in the Midwest, she's lived in 9 cities throughout the U.S. before moving to Italy, and most recently landing in Costa Rica, which is where she's broadcasting from. So this is the first international episode of the Morning Spotlight. So we are now officially worldwide. She's an author and founder of Awaken Village Press, which has published 7 books in the past 2 years. We welcome Amanda Johnson. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So, like I mentioned before, I don't know much about you, so we're gonna get to know you. I'm gonna get to know you along with our listeners. So, give us like a quick overview of who Amanda Johnson is.
All right. Well,
that's a very broad, broad question. Yeah.
It's all right. I like to see what comes out. As you said, I am a bit of a nomad. I was raised in the Midwest before I moved to the West Coast, spent a number of years in California where I was a professional actor. So career number 1 was me as an actor in San Francisco. That then led me to not the acting, but after that, I was led to hike the Appalachian Trail. So I went to the East Coast.
Okay.
And I spent a few months hiking in the woods, 6 to be precise. And I decided to leave acting behind. And that led me into a job of corporate consulting. Now, that was not intentional. I did not even know what a corporate consultant did, but I found my way there, or rather it found me. And that landed me in New York City for 4 years as a professional or a corporate consultant. Finally, I decided that it was time to quit corporate, and that again came through the inspiration or invitation of another who said, I think you could be doing something else. So I jumped into the unknown to start by dipping my toes in a startup company. And in this startup company, I learned that I knew a lot more than I thought I did. And I had abilities and skills that I didn't realize I had, but I had been developing them, of course, for many years. And then I could say now, luckily, that didn't work out. That didn't pan out. And so I ended up quitting that job on very good terms with the founder and CEO, because we both realized that something was just not quite fitting. And that was my full, I had been dipping my toe in the water, and then I took the plunge. And I took the plunge entirely into the unknown. No plan B. I didn't even know what I was going to do or who I was going to become. But what I did know is that I wasn't going to do what I had done before. And I knew that there was something more for me, that there was something that I was here to craft, shape, be a bit of I didn't even know about a way shower, or even a trailblazer. I didn't know any of this was there, but I just knew I wasn't meant to follow the mold or the structure that had been set before. And that then meant there was about 3 years of complete discovery. It was hitting rock bottom. It was, quote unquote, losing everything. Gosh, nothing was lost, only gained. But I did have to get to that point of feeling like I didn't have much left, except realizing at that point that, wow, I can do this. And in that time frame, I took a life coach training program. I wrote a book, and then I eventually started my own company as an independent publisher.
Okay, so literally all over the map, both literally and figuratively. So I want to talk I want to go through the story, kind of all more details into the whole story. So first up is the acting side. So you're in San Francisco. Was it like stage acting? Was it television? What was it?
Yeah, it was all stage. So yeah, when I was studying theater, of course, long ago when I was very young, I'm like, I'm going to be a movie star, right? I think that's many actors' dreams.
Right.
It didn't happen. But I did end up in San Francisco on stage. And what I realized at that point was, wow, this isn't much of a career. This is me maybe getting money for gas to get me to and from the venue. So it didn't take long before I realized, wow, this is not all glamour and bright lights and fame. It was actually really exhausting for not a lot of money.
Yeah, right. So I actually used this phrase in an earlier episode, and I've used this because I have had several of these moments myself. I call them the coming to Jesus moment, right? So at what point in that career were you like, okay, this, I know you just said like this is not really a career. You're probably like living, I don't even know, paycheck to paycheck, but whatever you can get in between, you're trying to get. So like, what was the impetus that made you take that leap into basically corporate America?
Yeah, great question. So the way it happened for me was I was in a relationship at the time with a man who his lifelong dream was to hike the Appalachian Trail.
Okay.
And I said, well, I have no idea what that is, but sure. And I remember that right before we left, I was in a show and I had that moment of, this isn't joyful anymore. I'm actually not even enjoying the thing that I thought I'd want to do the rest of my life. And that was a real eye opener. And so it felt easy for me in the time to say, sure, let's go do something else. And so then I had 6 months to think about it and to reflect. And by the end of the trail, I thought, yeah, I think I'm done with theater. And I'm done with that lifestyle because I didn't want to do the LA thing. And I didn't feel I was good enough for the Broadway thing. So I said, okay. So anyway, by the way the consulting fell into my lap as the next step for me, that also was perfectly aligned ultimately, was I took a temp job. So I showed up at a temp agency. I said, hey, what can I do? They put me on this project, and lo and behold, the senior manager said, we'd love to have you do this full time. And she helped me get a job with like one of the largest consulting firms in the world.
There you go. It's crazy how stuff like that works out sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So talk to me about the Appalachian Trail. Like what was that experience like? Because I've never done anything like that. I mean, I like to go on hikes. My girlfriend and I will go on hikes, all around here in New Jersey. But that's obviously a lot different. So take us through what that experience was like.
Well, so it's interesting because I had never carried a backpack or slept in a tent before before we went.
I mean, if you're gonna do it, you might as well just jump in head first, right?
You're going to kind of see a theme in my life, actually, if we get through all of these stories, because you can kind of say I like to just jump in fully often. And I can now see that more and more in my life as it unfolds. But yes, at this time, I was very trusting of this human that I was going with. We did a few trial hikes and a couple overnight. So that's not totally true. I did sleep in a tent before the trail in preparation. But the journey of walking more than 2,000 miles on foot, it is a life-changing experience for me. It taught me, again, I'm more capable than I think I am. It's such a beautiful metaphor for life in general, and it served me for many other things in terms of putting literally one foot in front of the other, just getting up and doing the next thing, walking the next day. It was such a beautiful lesson in perseverance. I mean, there were definitely times you walk through Virginia. It's called the Virginia Blues for a reason, because you don't think you'll ever leave the state. And a lot of people leave. I know I almost did, because it's just like, come on, every time you entered a new state, I remember standing on the New York, New Jersey line, right? Boy, that was epic. So yeah, the whole journey, it offered me so much. And ultimately it offered me this knowing deep within my bones that I could never shake, that I really can accomplish something that I set my mind to. And that was probably the first and still most significant experience that I've had.
Right. So at what point do you make the move to Italy? That's after the corporate consulting job, right?
Yes. Yep. Yes. Okay. Very recently.
So why'd you go there?
My heart. I know It sounds ridiculous. Yeah,
no,
literally. Yeah, my heart, and I like to read signs. I feel like I am guided through life by paying attention. And so depending on people's perspectives, I feel like I'm being guided. And it felt very clearly that I was being guided to Italy. And I bought a one-way ticket to Venice, and I went there intentionally to visit. I didn't know I was moving there. And then after spending about 5 weeks, within 3 days, I was in love with it. But by the end of the 5 weeks, I knew I was coming back.
Right. Okay. So how long did you live there for? And like, what did you do to actually feed yourself?
Well, so because prior to going to Italy, I had already established myself as being able to work remotely from anywhere in the world.
Okay,
So I've been since 2018. I've been, able to at least sustain myself and provide for myself, so I can work anywhere as an independent publisher. And so I was still able to do my work there. With my clients. The time zone, the time change made it a little tricky, but I was still able to do it. And interestingly, I just want to make this point because it's also part of the story. I finally decided, okay, I'm going to live in Italy. I mean, I hadn't chosen to live someplace for a really long time. I was either living in someplace a little by default, or because that's where I ended up. But this was the first time I said, I'm moving here. And I did it. And then I had left my things there when I left in January of 2020, went back to the United States for a couple months, came to Costa Rica for my writer's retreat in March, and never left because the universe, the world had other plans for me. So here I am.
Okay, so I jumped ahead a little bit. So you had already started the publishing company before you went to Italy. So take us through like what I know you mentioned it at the beginning when we were talking about like who Amanda Johnson is. But what was it like to finally be like, you know what? And I know, and we're going to talk more about it because I feel like I'm in a similar mindset. Like once I get my mindset on something, I'm like a dog on the bone. Like I can't, like I will not be shaken off of that path. Like I'm doing it. But what was like the moment where you just said to yourself, hey, this is what I'm going to do now? Because I don't know if I'm off base here, but like, it seems to me that a publishing company is not necessarily like what your background was. So like, why that?
Great questions. Well, so let's back up a few years. So after the corporate consulting job and my mentor, in a sense, saying, hey, come do this other thing. And then I left this other startup. That for me was the moment of no return. So for those years, I was doing some more writing, a lot of exploration, like self-exploration, self-discovery, personal development. And I realized pretty quickly that I had a book inside of me that really wanted to be birthed or written. I speak in birthing terminology a lot when it comes to the creative process. And so when I set my mind on that, I ended up writing my first book and self-publishing it in 2017. With the intention of then being an author. I was going to write books, be a speaker, do that. And
what was the book? But before we keep going, let's talk about the book.
It's called Becoming Enough, A Heroine's Journey to the Already Perfect Self. And that was for me, the journey of my life, so that I used the hero's journey actually to lead, to take myself and the reader on this journey of being overly perfectionistic, doubting myself left, right, and center, and constantly in comparison. And then I go through how I ultimately, I won't say overcame those things, but I did start to look at all of those things differently in my life. And what did that take? And what did that look like? And by the end, what did I discover about myself? Right. And so it was the journey to discovering more of who I truly am. And that was book one. I had 2 more books to write. And when I started book 2, it did not flow. It was not coming through me like the first book. And I'm like, okay. And by this point, I'm not really, I was entrepreneurial in that I had thought I was starting a business, but nothing had taken off yet. I was still just figuring it out as I was kind of making up as I went along. Writing the book took a lot of my time and effort. And then after book 2 was not flowing, I was talking with a very, very wise friend. And by this point, by the way, I'd moved back home, moved in with my parents. This is like, I like to sometimes give a reality check because not every entrepreneurial story is overnight success. Some are, and I think that's amazing. Mine went a little differently. So mine did result with me spending my savings and getting in debt and moving home with my parents for a couple of years. And that gave me the ability to write a book and find my way. But a very dear friend of mine said, well, why don't you help people do what you just did? You obviously wrote a book, and I did it in 6 months from really like sitting down and getting it published. And I said, oh, okay. So that's what launched the publishing house, actually. So yeah, you're right. Of course, I had experience writing, editing. I worked with a publisher. That was all leading me up to doing this myself.
Right. Okay. So then, so you start, you listen to your friend, you start this business. How do you find clients? Like, how do you find authors that like want to work with you?
Yeah. Well, this is again going against probably what most people would say. I actually have not done any marketing. So if you want to, I'm like, that's just been my journey. I've been a slow grower, right? So for me, you can probably market and go fast, and I wanted to go organic and slow. Or that's how it happened. One thing I told myself before, as I was creating a company and really, or just doing my work in the world, I was very clear that I was not going to lose touch with what is true for me. And sometimes that meant not doing the thing that everybody said to do. Sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. And when it came for me, what happened was I got every client was referred to me, either referred to me from a friend, referred to me by another client, or I would meet them at an event. So I went from I had one client in the summer of 2018. By the end of that year, I had 4 clients. By the middle of 2019, I think I had 10 clients. By the end, so they just kept growing. I think over the course of the 2 years, I've worked with at least 20 authors and we've published 7 books. So, people are finding me and and now we're at a point of growth as a company, scaling, growing. And now that's where, okay, I'm ready to cast the net a little wider.
Right. Okay. Scaling and growing. Like, what are we talking about? I'm assuming it's not just you, right?
That's right. So last year in 2020, I went from being a solopreneur to, by the middle of the year, other than having hired a contractor here or there to design the books, do some editing or proofreading, I finally hired my first official team member, like full-time, team member, to help me with the business operationally. And then that attracted another, and then another. By the end of the year, now we have team calls. It's still a small and growing team. Yeah. We have about 6 devoted people, who support us in one way or another. And at this very moment, I am merging with another company, a digital marketing agency, who's been working with spiritual entrepreneurs for the past 3 years. And we're coming together now to give voice to the new paradigm. So we're now each probably doubling. Well, we're now going to grow in size at least ×2 and beyond, with a vision and a goal of becoming a multi-million-dollar publishing company.
Well, obviously, like, if that's not the goal, then what are you doing? Like, why do it?
What are we doing? Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the types of books, I think briefly there. So maybe we could walk us through, like, is that your vision? Like, you want to help people write the same kinds of books that you were writing? Is it kind of like you'll take what you can get kind of books? Does that make a difference?
100%. Actually, yes. Thank you for clarifying. That's been another value of mine from the very beginning, is that I'm not here to just publish more books in the world. Right. I'm here to support authors who have a story and a message that is yearning to be told in the most transformational way. So for me, writing a book is a transformational journey in and of itself. And that's first for the author and then for the audience, for the readers. I didn't have to be specific about that because I seemed to attract that. For me, it's a resonance, it's a frequency, it's a vibration. And so people who where there's a match, right? Where there's a match of philosophy or mindset or again, just a vibrational match, then those are the people I tend to work with. And of course, that continues to evolve and grow. I am most interested in telling the stories and sharing the messages that need to be heard now. I feel we are in such a critical time in history to awaken ourselves, awaken the planet to what's truly going on. And so that's part of what I'm here to help spread.
Yeah. So do you ever meet like people and do you like get that vibration, that feeling from them and be like, you should write a book and I want to do it, like help you do it? Do you ever get like wind up in that situation?
Yes. It tends to be mutual. It's interesting because when I meet a person, I'm like, ooh, okay, there's a connection here. Right. And that's the ones that I follow. And then same, if someone meets me, they go, ooh, I feel a connection. let's do this together. Right. And so and again, I think as we now grow and scale, and it's not going to be just me anymore. Yeah. Now it's a matter of being clear on our mission, being clear on our vision, being clear on the culture and values of our growing company this year, so that we continue to attract and call in the right fit, quote unquote.
Right. So, as someone that does not think that their message needs to be shared with anybody else outside of my little kingdom here on the Morning Spotlight. Mm-hmm. So like, how does someone know? I mean, you said that you at some point knew you had a story in you that needed to be told. So like, what's that feeling like? Because maybe some people that are listening have that feeling and they're like, oh, I have this story that I want to tell. So how do you identify that? I don't know if that's a good question to answer.
No, it's a great question actually. And I love it because the first thing that wants to be said is, for me, the fact that I had that desire. So I remember I was like, oh, I really want to write a book. And then a voice in my head said, well, everybody wants to write a book. So when I was having a conversation with a very trusted friend, advisor, mentor, and she goes, well, I don't think that's true. Not everybody wants to write a book. And that information, and I have since received that same message in other ways in my life, helped me acknowledge that this is a desire, and it's a desire that I have and I possess. And because I possess it, it actually is something to listen to follow through on. So for me, what I would say is what that feels like is this, it was like a yearning. It was like oh man, I really have something I want to say.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I would, and my point of bringing that up is if any of you have that feeling, you maybe are like me, where you're like, oh, everyone has this thought. But I would encourage you to pay attention. Right. Because it may not be, oh, everyone has it. I don't have a desire to build a sailboat. Yeah. And some people really want to build a sailboat.
Yeah, right. But I also think that sometimes, like when you get into platforms like a podcast or writing a book or anything where you have to put yourself out there and be in a vulnerable position, there's a lot of that doubt in your head that's like, well, who cares? Who cares what my story is? I'm Mike Ham from Morristown, New Jersey. Like, why would anybody want to listen to me? But I do it anyway because I don't care. But there are a lot of people that do care what other people think about them.
Okay, so yes, and to me so once you have identified that there is a desire, of course, the first thing that any of us, including myself, feel is, but who am I and why would anyone care? So actually, if you are feeling that and asking that, it's a good chance that you really need to tell your story. And why I would say that is because that fear is not going to go away. It will go away, but it's going to be there. It's a natural fear that will arise. For me, I recognized it because, and I was speaking in terms of ego and, false self, true self, based on what I was reading. And so at the time when I was writing my book, it was very clear to me that there was something so large that wanted to come, or larger than me, that wanted to be expressed, that my ego, or whatever you want to call it, personality, fear, just wanted to put a lid on it. And so I would actually highly encourage it. If anyone has that thought, I can tell you firsthand, your story does matter. And the reason I can say that is because I actually did write the book, and I had people tell me, wow, thank you for sharing your story. And I'll tell you, I don't think my story is anything special or unique. I actually think my story is pretty boring to some degree. Right. And yet I knew I had to tell it. And by me even saying that in the book, I've had people tell me, wow, I'm so glad to know that not everyone had to go through this, near-death experience or this massive trauma. And I'm not saying don't share your story if you did. I'm just acknowledging I didn't have those things. And therefore I thought my story didn't matter. And I've actually now had people say, thank goodness you shared your story. Now I know mine matters too. And so there's always space for you to share your story.
Right. I think it's like, it has to be daunting. I mean, again, I had never written a book. I don't think that I would write a book unless, maybe after this episode, I feel compelled to write my story. But I think just putting the podcast out there, because it's daunting, because you have podcasts that people listen to a lot, right? Like millions of downloads, and the hosts make millions of dollars. And granted, they're famous, but so they had like a little bit of an audience coming into it, or a big audience coming into it. And I had nothing, so I had to build it up myself. And then on the same end, people that write books, I feel like are former presidents and celebrities and people like that. So now you're putting your story and your message and your, self out with them. And then it's like easy to kind of start comparing yourself to other people, which obviously is a terrible thing to do, but people do it anyway. Right. So.
Yeah. And one thing that I'd say with that, because again, all of this is so natural and so common, that the other thing that I had to come to for myself, and what I share with any author or writer who comes to me, is if I'm writing my book for others, then I want to take a step back, because for me, it's about writing it for myself. Yeah. And for every author, it's about writing it for themselves first. Once we've done that, then we can let it go and release it and trust that if it's meant to reach 100,000, million, 2 million, 10 million people, it will. And if it's not meant to, that's okay. It doesn't devalue putting it out there. For me, the fact that you have a podcast, and I know this sounds so corny and cheesy, and yet I actually believe it in every cell of my body. Even if one person is listening and goes, oh my God, I'm going to go do the thing that I never did before because of that one thing. Wow, we changed a life, or you changed a life, or had an impact. So I'm a big fan. You're right. It may not be a New York Times bestseller, and it could change one person's life significantly.
Right. So let's talk more, because I think that in one way we are similar in the fact that once we get our mind on something, you better get off the tracks because the train's coming through. So have you always been like that? Or is that something that, at one point in your life, you just kind of found?
It's interesting because I feel like I'm a really good, I'm a really great starter. And I do feel that I'm very persistent. Sometimes that really serves me. And sometimes, especially in the world of dating, it's not that attractive. I can be really, really tenacious. I'm like, are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure? Are you sure?
Right.
But it does serve me in other areas of my life. So, I would say it's obviously a trait or a quality that I possess. And that doesn't mean that I haven't also stopped things. Like when I think back from when I was a child, I actually feel like, I was in dance class and then I quit, and I took piano lessons for a year and then I quit. And then I did this thing because there was something about it that, didn't keep me. It didn't hold my attention.
Yeah.
So the fact that now I have this it is a stick to itness. And I feel it's less about the thing, like whether it's writing a book or having a publishing house or traveling to a country. It's more that I'm determined at this point to stay true to myself. And so I think if we're true to ourselves and that whatever we're doing is an expression of that, then yes, you better believe I'm going to keep doing it and I'm going to stick to it.
Yeah, like similarly, like I think every kid goes through that, right? Like they try something, they hate it. They try something, they hate it, and then like even just for me, just being confident enough to just like make the jump and go start something like this or something else. I mean, like really, I think just when I made the jump to start doing the podcasting stuff last year in May, that was like a big moment for me because I'd always done that. Like I always like start something and then like after a month I would get tired of it and I'd try to go do something else. But this was like, I need this because I need it for my business. I need it for networking. I need it for everything. So it was out of necessity, like backs against the wall. It's 2020, chips are down. What are you going to do? And then, like, I think I learned a lot about myself over the last year because I was able to put something like this together. And I think, you would say the same thing. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but something where like, like you said, you're a good starter. Like, I think I'm also a good starter, but sometimes I'm not a great finisher, like I don't necessarily follow through with everything, so.
That's been one of my biggest ahas in the last few months, because I started noticing that with my company. And again, if those listening or find themselves in entrepreneurial fields, a lot of entrepreneurs, I believe, are starters because we get these ideas. We're a visionary. We're, like what can I do? What's my passion? And we go after that or we pursue that. And that same quality doesn't necessarily mean or equal I'm going to then be the one to ultimately manage it, run it, take it to the next stage. We might be, right? There can be some crossover, but I actually finally came into that acceptance after 2 years of being a solopreneur that, I actually don't have to do all these things. And even better, there are probably people who are way better at running a business than me. So why don't I now let that happen and keep doing what I'm really good at, which is, okay, what's the next big vision? Okay, now what's the next big vision? And what I'm really getting clear on is when we come more and more into accepting, like if I'm a great starter, then I may put in the work for a year, 2 years, whatever it takes. And what about now identifying the next person who can step in and take it to the next level?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So you mentioned over the course of your initial like kind of story, right, who Amanda Johnson is, that there was like a rock bottom moment. Was that when you had to move back in with your parents? Was that another time?
Yeah.
What was the rock bottom
I'm going to say
moment?
it. I think it was the moving back home. I mean, and I was actually already today, I've talked a bit about myself. So I actually already shared this story. So I'll say it again, because that was my recognition of that was pretty rock bottom. Being 35, I by this point already lived in some of the greatest cities in the US. I had made a decent salary for many years and had gotten to the life of like, okay, I can do what I want. I can, do this, that, and the other. And I had essentially gone all the way from that, savings in the bank, feeling really, really comfortable, to the exact opposite. Literally the pendulum swung the other way. And being 35, moving in with my parents into my childhood home in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with an alcoholic boyfriend. So I kind of feel like that's my lowest point.
That sounds close to being a lowest point.
It's pretty low, right? It's pretty low. But what I would say, which is so interesting for me to reflect on, because in my perspective, it is those low points, those dark nights of the soul, the rock bottoms that do, when we are willing, they can be the most fertile soil for what comes next. And that's exactly what happened for me, right? It's from that point where I wrote my book. It's from that point that I started my podcast. It was from that point where I said, there is something more for me. And I stayed the course. And I realized that as I was allowing myself to be okay with nothing, I could be okay with everything. And slowly but surely, I just, rose up out of the swamp.
Yeah, it's so interesting and so cool that you said that, because like, I mean, I've had my rock bottom probably more than one moments. Whatever it is, this is about you, so we won't get into mine. But I think that like when you're able to pick yourself up off the mat and like get back and start swinging again, I mean, that is to me like the biggest driver of like learning like who you are as a person. Like 2020, I mean, you're stuck in Costa Rica basically. 2020 threw everybody curveballs and gut punches and whatever metaphors you want to use, and next thing you know, like you started going through a year where people were, like maybe you lost some friends, maybe you lost, family members. What I don't mean like by death, but maybe just like it just like you realize that they weren't people that you wanted to have around you, because in a year that was just flooded with negativity, you wanted to see the people that were actually going to like rise up and take a leadership position or take, ownership of their own stuff. So like, I mean, like I'm not trying to toot my own horn, because I think that this is again about you, but like that was like a moment for me too. Like I feel like early on in the year where I thought that I was going to have this big year selling title insurance here in New Jersey, and next thing you know, the world stopped and I was like, well, I'm screwed now. But now what do I do? So I just had to make a conscious decision to actually, like I said, back against the wall, chips are down. What are you going to do? So some people wilt, some people rise up, and I think
that's right. And I think, and we all have our own points of that. And I love that you say it does. Rock bottoms can happen multiple times, and it's that, I mean, even here, I'm in Costa Rica now, I feel beyond blessed to be here. And it is, even here, it hasn't been without challenge, or it hasn't been without, gotta pick, what I'm noticing is, I love what you said. It's when we fall, we pick ourselves back up again. How quickly are we able to do that?
Right.
And it's okay if it takes a minute or a week or a year. And what I'm also learning is, the more I learn about myself, the quicker I pick myself up, more things start happening. Okay, let's go on. What next, right?
Right.
And we become more, adaptable and resilient through it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, it's just, especially like in today's world of like social media and everything, it's just like, I find it so easy to just wallow in self-pity and like, attract the attention, because everybody wants attention now. Like, feel sorry for me for XYZ. Like I recently had on, a woman who's a cancer survivor and like a fitness expert and all this kind of stuff. And her episode is going to post early February. But like, that's what she was talking about. Like, she had cancer, was going through this intense chemo treatment, and still flying around the country doing races and emceeing events and doing all that kind of stuff. Didn't miss one event. And then because she was talking about how she would see friends like post on Instagram, I sprained my ankle, pray for me. And she's like, are you serious? I just think that was like an interesting tie into another episode. But again, like I told you before we were going to start, we were going to be all over the place. And here we are. I knew this
I'm following the flow. It's perfect.
Right. So
I'm a Pisces. I love flow. It's okay.
So, all right. So Costa Rica, like, tell me what that experience has been like. You get there in March with the expectation, I guess, of being on vacation there, right? Or just...
I came to actually host a retreat in March.
That's right.
And then to work with a client. So I knew I was going to come for about a month, but before I actually boarded the flight, I knew my retreat was canceled, because by that point things were shutting down. People's, flights were getting canceled, or they were nervous. So I said, okay, there's no retreat, but I'm still going to Costa Rica. Why not? I had another month before I could go back to Italy anyway. Yep. So I said, okay, great. I intuitively got on a flight 3 days early and got to Costa Rica 3 days before the borders closed. So I came in just in the nick of time. That was March 15th of 2020. From that point forward, I was just like, I'm here. I just knew I was meant to be here. I had a carry-on suitcase with very few items that were, Costa Rica ready, because I had been in the United States for January and February. Yeah. But I made do. And I eventually, found my way. I mean, I have a community here, so I certainly wasn't coming to, try to fare for myself. And it was really like coming home. And I'm here, and I will only leave if I am forced to.
So you feel like this is a spot where you could stay?
It's a spot I can say, other than, like I said, I haven't done a lot of podcasting the last year for good reason. It's not reliable for that, but for everything else, it's been amazing. And it really is. I'm finding a community. My business is now growing. I mean, it for me, it was exactly where I needed to be. And so, yeah, I will be happy for Costa Rica to be home.
Awesome. So talk about the podcasting. You have your own show. So
I do.
What is it?
Yeah, it's called the Being Inspired Radio Show. And it hasn't had any, I put a big pause on it actually before the pandemic. I can't even blame that. But when I actually, the year prior, was doing a lot of traveling, and I had kind of burnt myself out. Like I'd been doing a lot of recording the first half of 2019. And enough to just sustain me. I'm like, okay, great. We're just going to fill the year. I can take a break from recording. I was loving it, but I was just needing to pause, plus have a little more flexibility with my travel. And so by the end of 2019, I was nearly out of content. But then by that point, moved to Italy. I thought, gosh, I don't know if I want to keep this up. Ended up in Costa Rica by March. I actually had bought a podcasting mic, shipped it to Italy, and then left it there. So I just was like, I don't think the universe wants me to do a podcast right now. So,
right.
I have over 120 episodes. It was a labor of love, and some of the most inspiring conversations I've had. Like just I was always on fire after a podcast interview.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. It was something that I had never, just as a quick sidebar, never listened to a podcast before I started my podcast. And like, I just was like, oh, I know podcasts are a thing and I need a way to try to market myself. So let me try this. Like I always been interested, like, cause I, live here in New Jersey. I would listen to like sports talk radio in New York City and, like talking about all that kind of stuff and the way that different guys would get on the mic and talk about different things. And I was like, that's so cool. Like I want to try that. And
you're such a natural. You do great. You're so good at it.
Well, I had plenty of time to try to figure it out. I was not a natural at the beginning. I will say that it was rough at the beginning. It was a completely different show, like no background, no merch, no personality and anything. Mm-hmm. But how far we've come. So I'm interested, before we try to we have about 8 minutes left in this episode before we have to wrap it up and get back to the big room. But so you're someone that has so many different experiences, so many different interactions with different cultures and different people and all this stuff. And now you're basically, you are a business owner and an entrepreneur. So describe to me maybe like how you think that has shaped the way that you approach business, because obviously doing business and being a business person in Italy is a lot different than being a business person in New York City or San Francisco or Costa Rica, I'm sure too. So how do you think that shaped you to who you are now and how you approach life and business?
I love that question. What I want to say is, because I have now had the breadth of experience that I have, of course, it has opened me up to what all is out there, what exists. And part of that has also reminded me both how unique and different we all are and how exactly the same we all are. And I remember when I took my first trip to Hong Kong, that was my revelation of like, wow, I'm in Hong Kong and this feels like New York City, and yet it's totally different and totally the same, right? So from that point forward, it's just been this continuous expansion of who I am, which is reflected to me in all that is around me. And as a business owner, what I love about you inviting me to reflect on this question is, I believe what it has helped me to do is to stay true to, well, then how do I want to do things? Because as I keep traveling or meeting new people or having new conversations or hearing about this business or that such and such, everyone has their own opinion and there are a billion ways to do things. So how do I want to do it? And how do I want to, what feels truest to me? And then no matter where I go, actually, it doesn't matter because I'm consistently showing up as me in my business. And that will then attract the right people or bring in the right resources, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I answer that question.
Awesome. No, I love that. So I'm on some different websites that you have, like on my other screen over here, because sometimes I do this and I just like click around and if something pops up. What's being good with being you? Could you talk to us a little bit about that? Because we have 6 minutes left.
Yeah.
Let's dive into a couple more things, get as much packed into here before we have to close out.
Being good with being you was, so my phase one of being an entrepreneur was when I started AmandaJohnson.tv. And that was where I thought was up until I just stopped updating the website. That was my space. That was a space to promote or to showcase who I am, what I'm here to potentially offer the world in terms of my own messaging and offerings. And being good with being you was one of the first ideas that came through as how I could support others to remember. And again, it's only because I was reminding myself, right? We are here to teach what we are here to learn. And so I was on a journey, and sometimes still am, of being good with who I am. And that's what my whole book is about. Becoming enough is that reminder of, oh, right, I am already enough as I am. Once I could remember that I am good and enough as I am, then I was able to expand into more. But I had just been doing it the opposite way for too long. I was trying to be more before I was okay. And every time I would try to be more before I was okay, it was an endless, vicious cycle. So I wanted to reorder those things. So yeah, being good with being me, or being good with being you. It's living from that space of I am okay as I am. And from that place, I can become even more than I could ever imagine.
Yeah. I think in a similar fashion, like when I talked about some of my rock bottoms, like I always envisioned it as being like stuck in a hole, and like you have like branches and roots hanging down. And like the first one I would always try to grab and get out of that hole, because it was like I was uncomfortable being where I was and I needed to get out. I was so uncomfortable in my own skin that I just needed to try to like jump at the first opportunity to go do something or go try something or whatever it was. So, it's just a similar, I guess, concept, but just framed a different way. But, just like I said, I mean, again, we were going to be all over the place. You knew that going in. So here we are. So before we get into our closing segment, which I forgot to mention to you before we started, but we're going to do it anyway. One more question. You're an entrepreneur. You got a little bit later start than maybe a young entrepreneur, like a 20-year-old starting some type of like tech company or whatever they do these days, whatever the kids are doing. So what is maybe like a word of advice you would give to a new entrepreneur, regardless of age, about starting a business like you did?
Okay. My advice is to focus first on yourself, meaning what is it that you most need or want or desire? What problem do you need help solving? And if you aren't quite clear on what that is, look at the things you've already done with great ease and great joy in your life. And I guarantee you that is the gift or the solution or the business or the app or the new product that you are here to bring the world.
Awesome. Love that. All right. So we have 2 minutes left. So we are going to move this into our closing segment, which we do for every episode. So I will explain it so you don't have to freak out yet. So we call this Under the Spotlight because this is the morning spotlight. So every episode we've ever done, from episode 1 to whatever episode we're on now, I forget, we do this. So Under the Spotlight means they just listened to Mike Hamm and Amanda Johnson talk for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, however long we've been going. What is one thing that you want the audience to walk away from this episode with? It could be something that we've touched on already that you think is just really important, you want to re-emphasize, or just something we haven't touched on that you think is so important and just part of your message. So you're under the spotlight now. What is the one thing?
Okay. The one thing is, before you try to go out and be more than who you already are, come back to being exactly who you are, love that fully, wholly, unconditionally, and then grow. And trust me, you will be amazed at what will happen.
I like that, because that speaks to me personally a lot. Like I mentioned to you before, just being comfortable in your own skin and loving yourself and making sure that you know that you're worthy of, what the universe is bringing to you. Right. So, all right. So that is going to wrap up this episode of the Morning Spotlight. I will put all of Amanda's links and book link and whatever she wants me to put in the show notes will be in the show notes. So if you're interested in reading the book, if you are interested in writing a book and want to talk to her about writing a book, if you have that story, make sure you reach out to her. I'm sure she would be glad to hear you and talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. If you want to reach out to me, I will put my contact information, as always, in the show notes, themorningspotlight@gmail.com, or go to the website at themorningspotlight.com and fill out the form. We'd love to hear you if you want to be a guest or listen to us talk about a specific topic on the show. Amanda, thank you so much for doing this. This was a little bit off the norm of what we normally do, but still crushed it.
Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Me too. And everybody else, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.